The Boxster, Porsche's mid-engine roadster. Here today in the 981 generation, this base model Boxster focuses on simplicity above all else. This particular car is a Boxster Black Edition, but aside from a few options such as dual-zone climate control and heated seats, this is as base comes in Porsche land. No adaptive dampers, no torque vectoring, no leather dashboard. Nothing.
You know what though? That might not even matter. You see, this car... Okay, I don't really have it on me right now. Different day, lost the audio, don't want to talk about it. Anyway, this car is really interesting to me for 3 reasons. 1, it seems to have a recipe for a great sports car. It's lightweight, mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, and it's got a naturally aspirated, high-revving engine. The one in here is a 2.7-liter flat 6 that revs to almost 8,000 RPM. 2, it's modern. The current generation Boxster, the 982, is essentially a facelifted revised version of the 981 Boxster, which means that this nearly 10-year-old car actually still feels pretty fresh. And 3, unlike cars like, say, the 911 ST, which honestly have pretty similar philosophies to this thing, this is actually attainable for normal people. In fact, you can go ahead and buy one of these on the used market for the price of a new Miata. So, in short, it's affordable, it's got old school sports car ethos, and it's all wrapped in a modern body with modern tech. And I really do mean modern, because this fundamentally is the same car as the 982. And in terms of the design, well, I have always loved the way that the 981 Boxster looks. I think it perfectly encapsulates the concept of light mid-engine sports car. I think it is perfectly proportioned with the driver in the center. And it's got this beautiful side profile highlighting those front and rear haunches that are also wide, giving the body of the car so much presence. I love these aggressive lines flowing toward the intake vent, but my favorite bit of design has got to be the rear active spoiler, because I just love how it is neatly integrated with the protrusion on the taillights. It's just so beautiful. There's no lines on this car that are out of place. Everything makes sense. It is a timeless design, I believe, and it shows because the 982 looks very similar to this. The only way I could think of improving the 981's design is to get the GTS front bumper, because that has those matte black surrounds for the intakes and overall looks a little bit more modern. I think with the GTS front bumper, this is just perfection on wheels. And because again it is similar to the 982, it still feels fresh and modern on the inside. So let's take a look on the inside of the 981 Boxster. And I have to say first that it is quite difficult to get in because, check it out, the seat is almost touching the floor, which is great for sporty driving, but the problem is this beam in between the door sill and the actual interior of the cabin, it's quite wide, and combined with the fact that your seat is so low, it means that getting in and out is a little bit of a chore, especially with the roof up. However, with the roof down, you can kind of climb onto the car before sitting down. I think it's actually not too bad. For the interior design itself, now it's no secret that most of what you see here is shared with the 982, aside from slightly different aircon vents and a slightly different infotainment. But on its own, I find the interior beautiful, elegant, and minimalistic without sacrificing functionality. The interior quality, however, is a little bit of a mixed bag. Because this is a base level Porsche, there's no fancy interior stuff, no leather package whatsoever to elevate it, which means this definitely feels like a base model luxury car. So, good stuff first. Everything around you is soft touch. There's no hard, scratchy plastics anywhere, even at the bottom. This is still soft touch. It is wonderful. However, none of it is leather. I believe this is like fake leather or some like rubberized kind of texture. So it's okay to touch, not my favorite surface. Now, in terms of the other things you can touch, we have wonderful metal paddles in here, and boy, do they feel satisfying to use. We also have metal inserts on the Sport Design steering wheel. We have what I believe to be metal surrounds for the aircon vents, and metal door handles, which feel excellent to hold. However, not everything is metal. This, for example, this interior trim on the dashboard, some of it's metal, but some of it is not. So overall, it's quite mixed. A lot of it is good, but you just feel like you missed out on some options to make it truly luxurious. It is not luxurious. It is premium, but not luxurious. That's what I'll say. But in terms of the ergonomics, I think they are spot on. Despite being a low-slung sports car and you sit nice and low, nearly towards the floor, there's actually a decent amount of space in here and plenty of adjustment in the steering wheel and the seat. You have no problems getting comfortable in here. Now, the seats themselves are very, very comfortable. They are really soft and supple without being too soft, and the side bolsters make it incredibly supportive, especially when you're cornering. But my favorite part is when you want to chill out, the headrest is super soft and supple. You can just go miles and miles and miles in these seats without any issues. Now, in terms of where everything is located, all of the locations of the buttons and things are actually pretty logical. You have your window controls here, you have your driving stuff here like your sport mode and your ESC, you have your infotainment buttons within the center screen. Everything is located in the place that you expect them to, and you can reach everything from the driver's seat. That is great because the car, of course, is not that large. Now, in terms of practicality, shockingly, it's actually pretty decent in here. Now, it's not going to be a Suzuki Hustler in terms of the usage of its interior space, but it's not bad. Check it out. So on the side, we have one door bin near the speaker to put stuff like phones and wallets and whatnot. You have another extendable door bin to put other things if you want a felt line surface to place them in. That's pretty good. You also have a tiny compartment in the center to store two-dimensional or really small things, maybe a phone or something like that. This, I'm not really sure what that's for, maybe for some coins, for toll. You also have a decent sized glove box in there, and you have your aux and USB inputs in there. And your cup holders are integrated beautifully into the interior. They're actually hidden behind this panel. If you press it, ta-da! Your cup holders are revealed, and you don't have to stare at this ugly mechanism. What you can do is simply press it out, and look at this, right? If you flip this cover back on, a part of the panel remains down, kind of like an aircraft landing gear, and what you get is a relatively clean design, even if your cup holders are sticking out. However, this cup holder isn't my favorite because you have to manually adjust the size, and the fact that it's only supported within a narrow area means that it doesn't hold all types of bottles that well. There are, however, even more storage spaces on the outside. You have a really sizable trunk in the front, and you have a decently sized trunk in the back because, of course, it's mid-engine, so you have two compartments, kind of like an EV. So this really could be a daily grocery getter type of vehicle if you can deal with the difficulties of getting in and out and the nuances of driving it daily, which we'll get onto later. But it's actually not too bad. I am very impressed. So now let's try and see how it is as a daily driver. I have my Porsche shaped key in here. Let's start her up. And she roars to life. Okay, so let's try and work with the roof up. So this roof can be operated at speeds of up to around 50 kph, if I remember correctly, which is actually decent for town driving. In case it starts to rain, you don't have to slow down that much. Okay, so now let's set off and try driving the Boxster as a daily. I'm glad I put the roof up because it is starting to get a little bit terrible out there. Okay, so the first thing you notice when you start setting off is, oh boy, the steering. is pretty heavy, but it's not impossible to single-hand it. It's just a little bit difficult. The rack itself is actually pretty fast. It's around 2.5 turns lock to lock, at least with this base model. So it's not terrible to drive around town. It feels pretty maneuverable. And look at this. You get pretty good visibility out the front and out the sides. And this car, despite its width and despite its low slung profile, is very easy to place when you're driving it around town. So that is great. However, the visibility out the back is pretty crap because of the roof mechanism. You have a huge blind spot right over there and right next to you on the other side as well, which means pulling out of junctions, you really need to lean forward to check if you've missed any oncoming cars. But with the roof down, obviously that's no problem. I suppose that is a fair compromise. Now, when you're trying to park this thing, it's actually all right as well. Check this out. So when you put it into reverse, your mirrors, or at least with the mirror on my left, will auto tilt down. I have parking sensors everywhere that tell me how close I am to objects. And my reversing camera is actually kind of clear. The guidelines make it really useful to see where your wheels will end up. The only problem is that the angle of the camera it feels very fisheye to me, and that makes me feel like the car is way bigger than it is. And I suppose that may be intentional, so you're extra careful with the car, but that's what I noticed when daily driving it. Now, another thing is that because the door is relatively long and quite thick, because it does lead to the intake vent, you need to reserve a lot of space next to you whenever you park next to someone if you want to get out or get in easily. Because it is low, you really need a lot of space in order to maneuver your legs and your butt to get in the car, especially when the roof is up. So that is a minor problem. Overall, it's not terrible. So let's actually try to drive this on some faster roads. Alright, the first thing you notice, NVH. Let's talk about noise for a second. Because of the soft top convertible nature of this car, it automatically means that it can't be the most insulated vehicle from the outside world, and it isn't. There is a little bit of exterior noise that comes into the cabin. However, the windows actually keep most of that out, so it's actually not terrible, even at highway speeds. What is worse though is the tire noise, because there is a lot of bass that comes in and reverberates throughout the cabin, and you hear it everywhere, and it's obviously worse at freeway speeds. And what ends up happening is you can't really hear the sound system because there's so much noise from the tires drowning that out, which is a shame, because the sound system, even though this isn't like the top end version, this is like Sound Package Plus, the sound system is actually pretty good. There's plenty of detail in the bass, mids, and trebles, and it's crisp and just pleasant to listen to. So it's great in that regard. But I just can't hear it when I go fast, and I end up having to turn up the volume quite a ways for me to make out anything in the song I'm listening to. So that is a problem. I tell you what's also a potential problem. It's the ride, because the ride's not that great. Of course, being a sports car, you expect it to be firm, which I accept, and it is firm. But on the other hand, it is quite communicative. I feel every single bump in the road. I can feel the expansion joints, I can feel those lane markings, I can feel pretty much everything. But the consequence of that is you feel everything. All the bumps, all the undulations, you can feel them in your spine, in your butt. It is not that comfortable of a ride. However, I will say that the damping is excellent. The body is super controlled and there's no unnecessary motion in the suspension travel. It's just critically damped. It's perfect. And this is the base suspension. I have no idea how Chasm or the, I think it's called X73 sports suspension performs, so I can't say anything about those. But as base suspension, it's brilliant for a sports car, that is. For a daily driver, it's not that comfortable and it is a little bit of a pain. However, the engine is brilliant. This is a 2.7 liter flat six, and the power delivery, oh my god. It's naturally aspirated, so It's super smooth and super progressive. Everything that I do has a perfectly linear relationship with how much I flex my right foot. However, in normal mode, I can tell you right now, in normal mode, it actually feels kind of slow. So the thing is, in normal mode, you treat this basically like an eco mode because the PDK will take every chance it gets to upshift into a higher gear. Look at this. I'm at 50 kilometers an hour right now and I'm at 6th gear. It does really, really upshift, and combined with the naturally aspirated nature of this engine, which doesn't have that much torque down low, it means that it ends up feeling kind of sluggish. What's pretty interesting though is that, check it out, when you let off the throttle in normal mode, the clutches decouple. What ends up happening is that the transmission ends up going into neutral when you're not touching any of the pedals, which is pretty cool because it allows you to save fuel. Check it out, I can get less than 9 liters per 100 kilometers with mixed city and highway driving. How great is that? Considering the size of the engine, 2.7 liters, and the power of the engine, that's actually really, really good. Despite its merits, I have noticed that it becomes a little bit problematic whenever you need a sudden burst of power. Let's say you're on the highway and you want to overtake someone. So like I said before, when you let off the gas slowly, the clutch will disengage like that. It's pretty much in neutral now. But when you need to overtake someone, you want instant throttle response. The problem is, because the clutch is engaged, if you want power, the clutch first needs to re-engage, and then it can give you power. So in that sense, throttle response, at least in normal mode, is pretty terrible. It is worse than a turbocharged engine. But in sport mode, watch this. It's very good. There is, however, another problem with the nature of this PDK being a dual clutch transmission. So the thing is, because of the way this transmission works similarly to a manual transmission, I can't really come to a seamless, smooth stop that easily, unlike, say, a torque converter transmission, where the power comes on linearly. This is a clutch. It's either engaged or it's not. And when you get to a near complete stop, it does the manual thing where it disengages the clutch. That's pretty normal. However, when you release the brake pressure after a certain threshold, the clutch will re-engage. Watch this. So I'm almost at a complete stop, and the clutch is disengaged, and then I let off, and then all of a sudden I start feeling the car creep forward, like the clutch has re-engaged. So overall, with this car, I've been living with it for about a week. It is usable as a daily. There are some minor things that make it a little bit of a pain, like the suspension is not that comfortable, especially if you live in a place with terrible roads like this. This is in Tongcheng, tons of manhole covers. It's also not the most insulated from the road, and the gearbox, it isn't that smooth, especially when you come to a complete stop. It's just not that peaceful. It isn't this tranquil, serene luxury car. No, it's a sports car. And you buy a sports car not for daily use, you buy it in spite of the fact that you may need to use it daily. Where this really comes alive is the open road, and it is absolutely brilliant on an open road. Immediately, this car is just so lovely to drive. On a road like this, everything about this car screams immediacy. From the steering to the engine to the transmission, everything is fast and snappy. This is a mid-engine car, which means all the heaviest parts of the car are in the center. The driver is in the center. The engine is in the center. And what that means is that this car has incredible incredible handling balance. It's like a hammer. If the metal part of the hammer were in the middle rather than on one of the two sides, that means it's just so eager and so willing to change direction. It does so on a whim. Turn in is razor sharp. And because it's mid-engine and you are in the center of that mid-engine car, when you do turn in, you get this really, really pleasant feeling of the car rotating around you. And the steering also makes a big difference because this is a fast wrap. It's 2.5 turns lock to lock, and it is also really, really good. The on-center feel is fantastic. I know exactly when I am inputting something into it. And when I'm going faster, the steering becomes heavier because the wheels are loaded up. I can feel those tires being loaded. It is great. What all this means is that you get a car that you feel extremely confident in hooning about or driving quickly, because it corners like nobody's business. That said, the steering isn't perfect because I don't feel anything through the steering. I know this is an electric rack versus the 987's hydraulic rack, so naturally some things are going to be filtered out, but really I'm not feeling anything through this. There's no road texture, there's no bumps, not even the road markings, not even manhole covers. You see that? That's nothing. Nothing is transmitted apart from how you load the tires. It's numb. But you know what? For me, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to the track. I couldn't care less about limit handling. Maybe some of you will, but at 8/10 in Hong Kong has no racetracks. It's brilliant to drive because the fact is, when you have the roof down and when you can hear everything, you feel so connected to the world around you. And the suspension and chassis are so communicative anyway that really, I don't care. It is fantastic as is, despite the numb steering. It is so unbelievably good to drive on a country road like this. And yet, that isn't my favorite part about this car. My favorite part is the engine. A naturally aspirated flat 6. The power is delivered so beautifully and linearly that the sound is where it's at. Because it's so pure, so rich. There's no OPF, there's no turbos to mute the sound, nothing. You hear everything. And it is a symphony. A symphony filled with wondrous notes from the intake and exhaust, blended so beautifully. There's no fakery here. No sounds being played through the speakers. No unnecessary pops and bangs to compensate for the lack of sound. It's just pure, unadulterated flat 6. Whoa! Combination of notes, chords, harmonies from the intake and exhaust combine together to form different cadences throughout the rev range. Which means it's really interesting to listen to even if you're at low RPM. Because there's so much in that. And yet, when you look down at the tach, there's 4,000 more RPMs to play with. And at some point you kind of want to see what your musical instrument can do. have something as sonorous as this, you want to see what notes it'll play. And so you downshift in the first gear. As you go higher and higher and higher, the noises get more intense. And the exhaust wails and the intake growls as you click with a thunderclap into the next gear. This experience can only be made better if the gearing was ever so slightly shorter. Because I'll tell you what, these ratios, even if this is a 7-speed, these gears are tall, man. Top of first is already above 70. Second, I believe, is nearly 130 kilometers an hour, which is very much go to jail speed. But to me, those are the smallest of small gripes. Because this car is so incredibly balanced, so rewarding to drive. And I'm not just talking about the handling department. It's exhilarating and exciting, but at the same time, it's not that fast. Yet you feel like it's fast because of how incredible it sounds. But to me, the best part about having an engine that's not that powerful is that you have time to enjoy the soundtrack. And for being such a competent sports car, it can do the daily stuff surprisingly well. I mean, yes, of course, I know the suspension is harsh. The gears are long. And frankly, the steering, I've had better. But at the end of the day, this car is all about experience. The feeling of speed, the feeling of driving. It's all about the experience. And what an experience it is!